Ready to start? All right. Okay, well, I am Chris McEvoy. I am in the Entrepreneurship and Innovation department, I guess they call it, and it's a certificate program that basically requires 5 additional courses to earn the certificate, 2 of which are required, and the rest are up to the student, and there's a lot of variation. So it gives people a good opportunity to try out what they'd like to do. So I teach 3 courses in ENTR 310, which is the second of the 2 required, and they're an hour and a half. They're power hours. I just came from doing that, and I really love it. It's great. The students are all really engaged, and it's just fun being around them. So, okay, this is talking about business models, and we'll define what a business model is. The startup environment, customer discovery, and customer development. So these are all reasonably new terms. And to give you a little bit of background on me, I grew up, I tell people, in a little southeastern town called Bloomington that had a little school called IU, and my dad was on the faculty, so I was a faculty brat, and I think I lived up to that. So then when I left IU, I decided I wanted to go work for General Motors just to get a taste of best practices. And I also had an uncle who worked there, and he and his wife were delivered new Cadillac for her, a Buick for him, twice a year. So I thought, this is a life. Who could need anything more than that? So anyway, but that was back when. That was back when this was the biggest corporation in the world. And I left GM after 5 years, and I enjoyed every minute of it until I kind of didn't. To start a software company at the age of 29. And my main, I think, contribution was hiring people smarter than me. So we ended up having an unfair advantage that we mercilessly pursued. And we got financed by a bank, an angel investor, and venture capital firms. And we grew to $70 million in revenues with 350 employees and an international marketing footprint. And then finally we were purchased by Swiss Re Insurance Company, I think, out of Zurich, Switzerland. And we kind of all thought, boy, this is going to be wonderful to have a bunch of money behind us, because we were always a bootstrap, and we were growing so quickly that there was never any time to relax and take it easy. But it didn't work out that way. It turned out the people who bought us really had no idea what they were getting into, and they weren't particularly interested. They had a strategy of surrounding their insurance sales and their reinsurance sales with a bunch of service companies that served the insurance industry any way possible. So as part of this company, we ended up with 29 companies that they bought in a 6-month period. And they ran the gamut from replacing windshields to, I mean, you name it. And they had one of them. And they were all over the world. So if that sounds like a management nightmare to you, it was. It was indeed. It was a great education for me. It taught me that getting out of General Motors, which was a very big bureaucratic company, was a smart thing to do, and that I wasn't going to spend much time with these people because it was kind of General Motors all over again, but maybe to the third or fourth power. And so anyway, please. Okay, I was really hoping somebody would ask that. I had to pay her $5 before we sat down. The unfair advantage was that while I was at General Motors, I was in IT, and I was a programmer. And I was trained on the job because back then universities didn't do it. But it was wonderful training because you were being trained how to program. At the same time, you were working on real live problems. And so it really was enjoyable. About halfway through my 5-year stint, they brought in a totally new development platform, software development platform, and it took an awful lot of the drudgery out of coding. It made that so much easier to do that you could really concentrate on what you were trying to do for the user instead of worrying about these macros that, you know, should do things for you, and sometimes did, sometimes didn't. But it was a great education for me because I left IU with an MBA, and I was very interested in business, and I could immediately ascertain that these tools represented a huge advance in our industry, meaning the IT industry. And I could see where they reduced time, they saved money, it was better quality. I mean, there was just nothing to dislike. So I decided to, when I'd kind of fallen out of love with GM, I decided to form a company and look for an industry that was still mired in that genre of software, and then really develop software for that industry and be able to give them very, very fast turnaround times for new products, which at the time was a real hot button for the insurance industry in the US and really around the world. So anyway, that was kind of what I figured out, and having an MBA, I could talk that story about the financial benefits of it, and that's what I did. And I was, to my knowledge, I was the only head of a software company that was going around talking about profit and loss statements, probably to the point of ad nauseum, but nonetheless, that's what they got. So we'll move on. Thank you so much. I stayed for, now we're getting back to the sale of my of the company and then I went to work for, who bought us. After about 2 years, I moved on, and I founded some other businesses. Some were successful, some were failures. It was a negative to me personally that my first company, which is the one that I formed right after GM, was a success, because it gave me this false sense that, hey, this stuff's easy, you just fall right into it and do your thing. Well, it's not really the case. It would have been a lot better if I'd gotten beat up a little, and I'd have made a lot better decisions going forward. So about 12 years ago, I started a company called Wingspan Thinking, which was a consultancy that specializes in small companies, but really doing more than just working with the owner, really mentoring that person and giving them the advice of the wisdom that produced this. You know, this gray hair stands for something, and I might as well let other people benefit from it. And so that's really what I've tried to do, and that's what I try to do in our program here. I became a SCORE mentor. SCORE is that's an acronym for, I can't even remember what it is, it's very outdated, but it's a group of used to be retired business people who were available for mentoring people, and it was sponsored by the Small Business Administration that guarantees loans for businesses. And so it sounded like it'd be a fun thing to do, and I get to meet some people. It'd be a networking exercise, which up until then I hadn't done much of. And it was. It really was a great thing for me to do. And I found that I ended up not really wanting to go into the SCORE office once a week and sit, because so many times people would make appointments and then they wouldn't show up. And we always had 2, sometimes 3 counselors on hand. And I had stuff to do, and I kind of resented sitting there doing nothing when I had stuff I could get paid for to do. And so anyway, I just now retired from that. I got a little bit tired of the game. So I was by then doing only email or local consulting, but I never stepped foot in the office. And then about that same time, about 12 years ago, I got a phone call from the head of our department, who is still the head of our department, Natalie Duval-Coutil. And she said, I have a copy of your resume, and it looks really interesting, and I wondered if you'd have an interest in talking to us. And she very briefly described the program, and I thought that really sounds cool. And so I said, I wasn't circulating a resume. Can you tell me where you got it? She said, I have no idea. It just came to the top of my stack of stuff. So I never did find out where that made its way to her from. And so I began teaching for the first time and found I really enjoyed it, and I felt like I had a lot to offer, because by then my company had grown to 350 people. We had a marketing footprint all through Asia and Europe, which I was very much involved in making the footprints. And so I had a lot of experiences, some good, some horrifying, some, that I had stuff I could share with them. And that's the kind of comments I get from them, is that they learn stuff here that is really from the street, and that they really appreciate having that. So let's move on. Our program has grown to one of the largest of its kind in the U.S. We don't belong to any college or any school for the purpose of being open to all students. And we do attract, we have had a student from every major at Purdue. Really, the most students we have are engineering students, and we love them because they're smart, they work hard, etc. They are great role models. We do stuff on teams, and I make sure we have engineers on every one of our teams because they're such good role models. So we have, at this point, we have about 800 students enrolling each year. And we have been housed in the Burton Morgan Entrepreneurship Center since its founding in 2005. However, we are administered through the provost's office. We are the only academic program that doesn't belong to a big school. We belong to the provost. Don't know what he thinks about that, but it's been a very good relationship. And based on the surveys that we have done, 77% of our students are likely to be involved in a startup in the future. Most of them don't do that at the beginning. They go get some experience in a big company just like I did, and I still make no apologies for doing that. I think that was a very, very good time well spent. And the other thing that I really like is 96% of the students believe that the skills and knowledge that they gained are going to be useful in their future careers. And I think it will be. Any question? You've already asked one. So you don't get to go again until somebody else does. Anything you heard that you want to know more about or dispute? Okay, we'll move on. Okay, we're going to talk about business models, and a business model in very direct terms, is how a business makes money. When I first came to Purdue, business plans were the big thing that people were talking about. But so much of a business plan is conjecture, and so little of the business plan is really, here's how this thing is going to work, here's how it's going to make money, and here's how much money we think it can make. And that was really where the emphasis needed to be. Because unless you got that right, none of that other stuff made any difference. So that was one of the big things, and we'll talk about that right now. Back in 2010, a book was published called Business Model Generation, and it became a real kind of a pace setter for this kind of activity. And this is the business model canvas that, if you count them up, you'll see is divided into 9 sections. The left half of the business model canvas are the things that spend money. The right half are the things that make money. So there's kind of a logical variation here. And you can kind of see what they are. And one way or another, you can pretty well on one page get your whole business described in a way that doesn't take somebody else long to figure out what is it you do and how do you do it. So let's go another step. This is an example of what each of these segments is trying to accomplish. And people can review that, and then they kind of get some guidance in what they need to be filling in the blanks with. Now here is a business model canvas for Car2Go. Have you all heard of the little tiny cars that seat 2 people and they're all over the place? Well, that's this company. And so if you just briefly scan it, you can see the customer segments, who are your customers, customer relationships, channels, meaning how do you reach them, how do you communicate with them, value propositions, which is really the key thing on any of these canvases, is what is it you do better than anybody else? And that belongs here. And you can see individual urban mobility without car ownership. That's a pretty good sentence that describes what Car2Go does. And you know, when you think about it, that so many households don't really justify the amount of money they spend on buying, financing, and insuring an automobile for the amount of time they use it. They'd be better off using this. And I think as things become more electric, you'll see that happen more. Key activities, key resources, key partners, cost structure, revenue streams. So that's what the thing looks like. So it will help you organize yourself when you make changes to the business model. For example, this model was changed. Look at the blue circle, well, oval. Provide an option for larger cars holding 4 passengers instead of just 2. All the other things on here in red represented stuff you've got to add to this, things you need to consider. So it really helps you not think about stuff. It kind of jogs you to look at the whole picture. Questions on that? And we have, in the course that's before mine, that's the other required course, we have a book. It's a $163 book. And they came to this game pretty late. And so they decided they had to one-up the business model canvas here. So they invented one that had 16 places instead of just 9. It was not an improvement. It really wasn't. So, but I'm biased, I'll tell you that. Okay, the startup environment. A fellow by the name of Steve Blank, and I think we have at least one presentation, very short video by him. he has done a lot of legwork in this business and really uncovered a lot of, here's how things really ought to be done. And the first thing he noticed, he was an entrepreneur, and then he became somebody who funded entrepreneurial activities. And then he became interested in education, and for the last probably 30 years, he's been involved in education about starting businesses. And his discovery was that business schools at universities like this one and like IU originally thought of a startup as just a miniature version of an up and running business. And he said that couldn't be further from the truth, because an up and running business is up and running by virtue of the fact that they had a viable business model. And if they hadn't, they'd have crashed and burned. And so they're not the same at all. There are very few similarities, in fact. And so he's made a real name for himself teaching people what that means. And so back in 2011, Stanford University began teaching Blank and some other people's ideas. And so they began holding summer sessions for about a week. And our instructors, including me, all went out there and listened to Blank and, listened to all of those people. And it was very instructive, and this was called the Lean LAUNCHPAD. And the word lean is the important word here, is that the whole idea is start out small and simple, and then as you really get affirmation of what you have, people want to pay for, then you can begin to make it better based on their input, instead of sitting in a room with other people just like you, negotiating with yourselves about what the customer wants, because you can't do it. So anyway, this kind of depicts all that. And the Lean Startup has had a lot of press and is very well respected for talking to people about go out with small ideas as quickly as you can and validate them. And if you can't validate them, give them up. Go on to something else. And that is really the nutshell of what it is. So in 2013, an article appeared, and this is 3 years after all this got started, an article appeared in the Harvard Business Review that basically said the lean startup changes everything. And it was a very interesting article. And then this has led to the National Sciences Foundation Innovation Core, which is called I-Core. And after they had done research for about 2 years, they mandated that anybody applying for a grant from I-Core had to go through this program. It was that valuable. And I don't think it's shown on here, but I can remember hearing Blank or somebody talk about, they did some blind studies of the experiences I-Core had before requiring this program, and then the experiences after, and they were blind studies. And something like the NSF was denying 60% of the applications that were turned in. They just didn't feel they were ready to go. And so once this training came in, they began approving that number or higher. So I mean, they really found out that this was a path that could lead to success. And that has now spilled over into defense issues. Really just the government is a sitting duck for all this stuff, as you can imagine. So, and over 1,500 teams of scientists have taken the program at 50 universities. I've asked our director how come we're not part of that. She said, because there's no money in it. She said, you lose money when you become part of that. And our department doesn't have any money, or much money. So, well, I mean, we're part of it. I mean, training is done here, but we're not part of doing it, like a lot of universities are. Good question. And the other thing I'd say is that our department's focus is not on intrapreneurship, which is working with big companies on entrepreneurial projects or ideas, how to make that work. We're focused on the startup. So we figure that's where we're highest and best use. So, I mean, the point Steve makes is that large corporations already have a business model, whereas startups are really searching for an idea they can validate as a business opportunity. It's a totally different environment to be in. Any questions about that? Okay, one of the major elements of this is customer discovery, and this is one of the basic elements of the lean approach. And here is where we have a couple of videos.
For 21 years, I've led 8 startups in a variety of industries. 2 semiconductor companies, enterprise software, video games, consumer electronics, military intelligence, and it was the most exciting thing I could imagine spending my life doing. But now for the last 14 years, I've been an educator.
I don't know how to turn this down.
How to think a different way about startups and how to build their companies in a very efficient way. Hi, I'm Steve Blank. I'm a retired serial entrepreneur. In this series, we're going to talk about 2 big ideas. How are startups different from large companies?
Off.
Startup.
Loud.
And inside the lean startup, we're going to talk about the customer development process. We're going to talk about how to build a minimum viable product, how to build prototypes, and then we're going to talk about customer acquisition. We're going to actually get out of the building, talk to customers, and then get them to use or buy your product.
Oops. I've got to get back to my approach. Here, go back. Get back to the PowerPoint. Ah. Okay, lead me to it. Yeah, that's it. But I think we want to go back one, so we'll, yeah, here we go. Here's the second one. Okay, this is the lean method.